Two NATO jets have vanished over the South China Sea in less than half an hour. The world is calling it a catastrophic failure, one that now hangs over President Trump's every decision. Meanwhile, deep inside Europe, a trove of secret Ukrainian military files has spilled onto the internet. Kyiv reels, suspecting a traitor at the very top, while the war effort trembles under the weight of doubt. Hungary, defiant as ever, is openly flouting European Union demands. Viktor Orban is doubling his bet on Russian oil, warning his country faces disaster if Western sanctions continue. His urgent trip to Washington signals a risky new alliance, one that could shatter the European Union's fragile unity and redraw economic fault lines across the continent. In Moscow, the atmosphere is growing darker. Russia has begun purging its own loyalists, branding Tatyana Montian, once a pro-Kremlin Ukrainian lawyer, as an extremist overnight. The message is clear. No one is safe from the widening net of suspicion, as arrests and crackdowns sweep through the capital. Elsewhere, Europe's fight against domestic abuse has taken a radical turn. Governments are now deploying virtual reality to force offenders to relive the trauma of their victims, a desperate measure as conventional policies fail to stem the crisis. Together, these crises form a dangerous pattern. Old alliances are breaking, trust is eroding, and experiments with power are spiraling out of control. The global order feels more fragile than ever. If these shockwaves deepen, the consequences will reach into every home, threatening livelihoods, freedom, and the very sense of safety. Let's break down how these events collided, and what they reveal about the world's uncertain future. First, we turn to the skies over the South China Sea, where the disappearance of two NATO aircraft has sparked urgent questions and exposed alarming vulnerabilities. How do the day's headlines intertwine, and what do they reveal about the delicate balance underpinning our global system? Across continents, a torrent of crises is battering institutions once thought unshakable. NATO, the linchpin of Western defense, has just endured two devastating aviation disasters within a single hour. These are not mere technical malfunctions. They spotlight critical blind spots, raising alarms that even the most sophisticated militaries are far from invulnerable when stress intensifies. The aftershocks quickly ripple into politics. Former President Donald Trump's reaction to NATO's crisis has ignited a storm of criticism, with detractors labeling it a breathtaking lapse in leadership. As world capitals turn to Washington for steadiness, bitter divisions and personal agendas threaten the cohesion that global stability demands. At the same time, in Ukraine, nearly simultaneous leaks of sensitive military intelligence spark outrage and suspicion. With trust already in short supply, these breaches reveal deep fissures in both operational security and the fragile bonds between allies. When even the highest ranks are vulnerable to betrayal, who truly remains trustworthy? Diplomatic fires burn elsewhere. Hungary, long the European Union's maverick, has launched an emergency mission to Washington. Prime Minister Viktor Orban's abrupt visit signals more than anxiety over Russian oil sanctions. It exposes the widening rifts within the European response to the ongoing conflict. Hungary's insistence that Russian energy is irreplaceable, even as the Adriatic pipeline offers alternatives, suggests a complicated chess match of leverage and self-interest. While alternate oil routes technically exist, political gamesmanship clouds the facts. Budapest and Zagreb spar over supply and costs, revealing how infrastructure debates often conceal deeper strategic clashes. Every nation recalculates its interests, each move sending shockwaves through Europe. Meanwhile, in the east, tensions sharpen. Lithuania, perched on NATO's exposed frontier, declares readiness to use force against unauthorized border incursions, even contemplating the downing of stray balloons on suspicion of hostile intent. The language is escalating, and with it, the risk that a minor spark could ignite a crisis threatening the entire alliance. These headlines are not isolated. They are warning flares in a world where alliances strain, leadership falters, secrets leak, and the line between diplomacy and confrontation grows dangerously thin. To overlook their connections is to misjudge the scope and urgency of our global volatility, a mistake that could jeopardize personal security, economic futures, and the very fabric of democracy. But behind these headline crises, deeper forces are at work: political gambits, technological upheaval, and social experiments that are quietly rewriting the rules of power. As the pace accelerates, will old alliances adapt or fracture under the strain? When friends become suspects and secrets slip through cracks, who really holds the reins of war? Russia has crossed another red line. Even the most loyal pro-Kremlin voices are now targets. Tatiana Montian, once a fierce defender of Moscow, is branded an extremist by the very state she championed. No loyalty is safe. The regime's paranoia is so deep that yesterday's allies can become today's enemies overnight. These purges reveal just how fragile the Kremlin's grip truly is, and how quickly power can devour its own. But unrest does not stop at Russia's gates. In Ukraine, a high-ranking officer stands accused of leaking classified maps online. The scandal rips through the military, igniting fears of betrayal at the highest levels. As accusations swirl, trust within Ukraine's command fractures. The threat of sabotage from within could do what enemy fire cannot: shatter unity. Doubt spreads further as independent analysts, known as Deep State, publicly challenge Kiev's official accounts of the war. Their reports sow confusion, prying open the gap between leaders and the people. In this fog of information warfare, uncertainty itself becomes a weapon. When facts blur, morale and resolve can crumble just as swiftly as defenses. President Zelensky, sensing the shifting ground, adapts his strategy. He now urges strikes deep inside Russia, hoping to force greater support from Western partners. This escalation lands at a perilous moment. Intelligence communities on both sides quietly concede that sheer firepower will not win this war. Instead, they predict the final battle will be waged at the negotiating table, not on open fields. Even beyond the front lines, alliances are straining. Hungary, emboldened by Croatia, openly disputes the EU's stance on energy and policy. Their defiance exposes fractures within Europe, raising doubts about whether unity can outlast self-interest. The foundations of old partnerships are showing cracks, just as new threats emerge. As misinformation multiplies and alliances falter, the stakes rise for everyone. Trust withers, morale erodes, security grows more fragile with each passing day. If these rifts keep widening, the shockwaves could reverberate far beyond the battlefield, shaking economies, undermining democracies, and leaving everyday lives at risk. Yet with every crisis comes a new move on the geopolitical chessboard. As leaders and rivals adapt, the contest for influence and control is only intensifying. What happens when old strategies lose their bite and unfamiliar forces start to rewrite the very rules of war and justice? Vladimir Putin threatens a so-called devastating response, hinting at escalation that no one, not even seasoned analysts, can predict. American intelligence grows increasingly certain that Russia's military faces defeat, but every pronouncement from Moscow sends tremors through global markets and foreign ministries. The risk of one misstep igniting chaos looms over every negotiation and press conference. Yet, beneath the threats, diplomats on both sides quietly probe for another way out. Despite failed offensives and diplomatic gridlock, a fragile hope emerges. The next breakthrough may come not from the battlefield, but from grueling talks behind closed doors. The fate of nations could hinge on the resolve and imagination of a handful of negotiators. At the same time, Hungary's dramatic refusal to support Ukraine's entry into the European Union shakes the continent. Prime Minister Viktor Orban's defiance strains old loyalties, threatening to unravel alliances that have held for decades. Overnight, the political geography of Europe teeters on the edge of transformation. But the upheaval goes deeper than borders. In Croatia, a bold experiment puts domestic abusers inside virtual reality, forcing them to endure the terror they once inflicted. Here, technology is no longer just a tool for punishment. It becomes an agent for empathy, potentially reshaping offenders and, perhaps, society itself. Meanwhile, the battleground for control has shifted to the digital realm. In Russia, public figures face prosecution for online remarks seen as undermining the military. In France, authorities crack down on digital speech, punishing citizens for words that cross invisible boundaries. The fight for influence now rages in the spaces where ideas are born and reputations made or destroyed. The warning is stark. Societies that cannot keep pace with new diplomatic fronts, technological shifts, and the relentless churn of information risk losing stability or being erased from the story altogether. So, what lessons remain in this storm of crisis and innovation? And what can any of us do as the world's foundations tremble beneath our feet? The answers may lie not in grand strategies, but in how individuals and institutions adapt. In the next act, we explore the choices shaping tomorrow's world. In an era of leaks, purges, and propaganda, self-protection goes beyond passwords and privacy settings. When trusted institutions teeter and alliances fracture overnight, vigilance becomes your lifeline. Blind faith is risky. History proves that an ally today can transform into a rival tomorrow without warning. Start by interrogating the narratives you encounter, especially those from your most trusted sources. Compare facts, seek out unfamiliar perspectives, and stay alert for subtle signs of manipulation. The skill to sift truth from distortion is now essential for survival, both online and in daily life. Global turmoil is not a distant drama. An energy standoff in Europe or a military scandal in Ukraine can spark chain reactions, reshaping markets, prices, and the very sense of security in your neighborhood. Mapping these connections helps you anticipate shocks and safeguard your own financial future. Yet, surviving chaos is more than defense. It is adaptation. Certain societies are tackling entrenched crises with unexpected means. Croatia's deployment of virtual reality to fight domestic violence, for instance, shows how innovation can disrupt destructive cycles. The takeaway: unconventional solutions may be your secret advantage. Most importantly, resist the urge to withdraw. Participate in civic debate, stay informed, and encourage critical thinking among those around you. The strength of a society, and your own resilience, depends on open dialogue and the courage to question. In uncertain times, these are your best shields against losing agency over your future. As the world order trembles and new rules emerge, will you react or take the initiative? The next chapter explores how individuals and communities are rewriting the playbook for survival. What strategies are rising from the chaos, and which old habits must be left behind? Your perspective is not just valuable, it is essential. Will you stand on the sidelines, or step forward as the world reshapes itself before our eyes? Today's headline events are not distant noise. Each crisis, every surprising alliance, and every leak or purge signals that the old order is crumbling, thread by thread. These are not isolated incidents. They are early warnings of a sweeping transformation. To ignore these signs is to risk more than comfort. Our financial security, civil rights, and even our collective influence hang in the balance. What you notice, and how you choose to respond, can help shape these unfolding stories. The consequences will touch not only leaders and governments, but entire societies. As power shifts, alliances fracture, and truth grows ever more elusive, consider your role. Will you watch in silence, or share your insights and shape the conversation? Your analysis could be the perspective someone else needs to navigate this storm. Stay alert. Question everything. The rules are changing fast, and each voice, including yours, will help define what comes next. But let's dig deeper. These headlines, as alarming as they are only the visible ripples atop far deeper currents of history, psychology, and technology. To understand how fragile the global order has become, it helps to draw parallels with moments when the world itself seemed to teeter on the brink. Recall the Cuban Missile Crisis of the early 1960s. Then, as now, a handful of miscalculations, jets disappearing, intelligence leaks, or misunderstood signals, could have triggered events that spiraled beyond anyone's control. In that case, back-channel communications, secret diplomacy, and the willingness to see the other side's perspective narrowly averted disaster. Today, some fear that the world's leaders lack the patience and humility for such delicate maneuvering. We must ask ourselves, if a comparable crisis erupted now, would our institutions prove as resilient? Or take the collapse of the Soviet Union in the late 1980s and early 1990s. As the old order frayed, fragile alliances broke down, not just between nations, but within them. Suddenly, yesterday's trusted allies became today's rivals. In Moscow, once loyal Communist Party members were purged as reformers, and hardliners vied for power. In the streets, ordinary citizens watched in confusion as their certainties vanished overnight. Today's purges in Russia echo that era, reminding us that regimes built on fear often turn against themselves when pressure mounts. Meanwhile, the Nato aviation disaster recalls moments like the tragic shoot-down of Korean Airlines Flight 007 in 1983, when a single incident nearly escalated into full-scale confrontation between superpowers. Then, as now, the specter of technical failure, miscommunication, or sabotage hovered over every military loss, fueling conspiracy theories and undermining trust. The Ukrainian leak scandal, too, has historical echoes. During World War II, the Allies' greatest fear was not always enemy fire, but the possibility of traitors in their own ranks. Think of the infamous Cambridge Five, a group of British intelligence officers who secretly passed secrets to Moscow for years. Their betrayal sowed distrust not only within British intelligence, but also among allies, causing long-lasting damage to cooperation. When today's Ukrainian leadership faces suspicions of internal sabotage, it is a reminder that the greatest threats sometimes come from within. Hungary's energy defiance brings to mind OPEC's oil embargo of the 1970s, when a handful of producers upended the global economy, sending prices soaring and sparking lines at gas stations from New York to Paris. Then, as now, energy dependencies became weapons, alliances fractured, and new economic alliances formed in the scramble for resources. Today, Hungary's flirtation with Russian oil risks isolating it from the European Union, but also positions Orban as a kingmaker between East and West. Lithuania's saber-rattling over border incursions might seem minor, but it is reminiscent of the Berlin crisis in 1961, when a standoff over a few city blocks drew the world's superpowers to the edge of war. Back then, a misunderstanding over a single checkpoint could have sparked catastrophe. Today, a stray balloon or a misunderstood drone flight could provide the spark for a broader NATO confrontation with Russia or Belarus. But history offers more than warnings. It provides practical lessons in resilience and adaptation. In the aftermath of World War II, for example, devastated nations rebuilt not by clinging to old alliances, but by forging bold new partnerships. Think of the Marshall Plan, which saw former adversaries become collaborators in an unprecedented economic recovery. In every crisis, there is opportunity for creative problem-solving and a reinvention of norms. So, what practical steps can individuals and communities take to navigate these turbulent times? First, invest in information literacy. Just as nations deploy intelligence services to verify facts, so too must citizens develop the habit of cross-checking sources. For example, when news breaks about a military incident or a diplomatic spat, seek out at least 3 independent reports before forming an opinion. If possible, read coverage from outlets in different countries. Russian, Western European, and Asian perspectives will often highlight different aspects of the same event. Over time, this practice builds a kind of cognitive resilience, making you less susceptible to both propaganda and panic. Second, strengthen local networks. During the financial crisis of 2008, communities that weathered the storm best were those with strong local ties, neighborhood groups, mutual aid societies, and civic organizations. When global systems wobbled, these networks provided food, information, and emotional support. Today, as global alliances falter, the importance of trusted local relationships is greater than ever. Reach out, join community forums, and participate in local decision-making. These ties can be a lifeline in times of uncertainty. Third, Foster adaptability through lifelong learning. The world is changing at a dizzying pace, with new technologies, new threats, and new opportunities emerging every month. Governments and companies are struggling to retrain workforces for the digital age, but individuals who take the initiative, learning new skills, exploring new industries, or simply experimenting with new tools, are better positioned to thrive. Consider the example of Estonia, a small nation that, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, reinvented itself as a digital society, teaching citizens not only to use technology, but to understand its risks and rewards. Their example shows that even small players can adapt and flourish through education and innovation. Fourth, practice scenario planning. Just as militaries run war games and corporations conduct stress tests, individuals can prepare for shocks by imagining how different crises might affect their lives. For example, if energy prices were to double overnight, how would you adjust your family budget? If supply chains failed and certain goods disappeared from store shelves, what alternatives might you find? If political unrest erupted locally, where would you turn for reliable information and safety? These exercises may seem daunting, but as the COVID-19 pandemic showed, those who had thought ahead adapted more quickly and suffered less disruption. Fifth, support transparency and accountability. In times of information warfare, it is tempting to retreat into cynicism or apathy. But the health of democracy depends on active, engaged citizens who demand truth from their leaders. Attend public meetings, ask questions, and use social media responsibly to amplify facts rather than rumors. When societies drift towards secrecy and suspicion, open dialogue is the antidote. Finally, cultivate empathy. The Croatian experiment with virtual reality punishment for abusers is controversial, but it highlights a broader truth. Understanding the experiences of others can break cycles of violence and mistrust. Whether through technology, conversation, or community service, make the effort to see the world through others' eyes. Empathy is not just a moral virtue, it is a practical tool for bridging divides and building resilient societies. In sum, the world stands at a crossroads. The disappearance of Nato jets, the leaks and purges in Ukraine and Russia, the energy chess match in Europe, the technological experiments in justice, all are signals that old certainties are crumbling. Yet history shows that those who adapt, innovate, and reach across divides can not only survive, but shape the new order that will emerge. What will your role be as these stories unfold? Will you be a passive observer, or an active participant in the remaking of your community, your nation, and your world? Remember, every crisis contains the seed of transformation. The choices we make today, what we question, what we build, whom we trust, will echo for generations. In this era of uncertainty, vigilant, informed, and compassionate action is the most reliable guide. So, as headlines grow more alarming and alliances more precarious, do not retreat into fear. Instead, draw lessons from the past, use every tool at your disposal, and join the conversation that will determine what comes next. The future is not yet written. Your voice, your choices, and your courage will help decide its shape. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and above all, stay engaged. The world is watching and waiting for those ready to help write the next chapter.